However, not from chaos, but from opportunity, right? And so what does that mean? Well, to me that means that we need to show a little heartland economics. A little basic economics from the heartland. That doesn't mean it just works in the heartland. It'll work everywhere, but it is common sense, and it's about making sure our country works for everyone, not just for a few. So what I want to do in this campaign, and this is what's going to bring me to the White House, because I know people want to have a big discussion about the real challenges before us, right? They're tired of governing by tweets. They're tired of the mean-spirited discussion. And when you look up instead of looking down, and when you look at each other instead of looking away, this is what you see as our challenges. You first see the challenge of our democracy itself, right? You have people who are unable to vote, people whose votes are suppressed, racial discrimination and how our voting occurs. You've got big money politics washing in everywhere, including in the state of Iowa. So what do we need to do? We need to make it easier for people to vote and pass my bill to automatically register every eligible young person when they turn 18. The dark money out of our politics by passing a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. We need to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act. So we need to get our democracy back on track. To me, it's very hard to change a lot of these things unless we do that, state by state and on the national level. The next very big challenge we have in front of us is this change in our economy, right? This city, you have great manufacturing here. You've got incredible ethanol plants. I visited one of them a few years ago, and Golden Grain, and saw firsthand what was going on there, as well as the Poet plant that you have. And you understand that our economy in America works as one. We have to stop this rural-urban divide. And people have to understand that there are challenges in rural America as well as urban America. The poverty rate is actually really quite high for kids in rural areas. So what does this mean? Thank you. We're going to have to tell the country about this, right? So what does this mean that we need to do? Well, first of all, we have to see rural America's needs as, yes, farming, very important, in this state where you're what? Number one in hogs, am I right? Yep. Number one in corn, okay? And number one in what else? Soybeans. Okay, there you go. Well, Minnesota, we got you there. We're number one in sweet corn. We're number one in sugar beets. And mostly, which I know you guys from Iowa love to make fun of us, we are number one in turkeys. Okay? It's nothing like a little Minnesota-Iowa rivalry. Okay? So we know how important that Farm Bill safety net is for not just farmers, but for all of rural America. But you go beyond that, right? It is beyond the Farm Bill. We need hospitals that work for our rural areas, right? Yeah. Senator Grassley and I actually have worked together on a bill to make sure that our rural hospitals remain strong. We need to make sure we have infrastructure that works across the country, and that includes rural broadband, and that's one of the reasons that I stood in front of that snowy river and said, when I'm president, we will connect every single household in America by 2022. We can do that because otherwise we are not going to be able to get the kind of Wi-Fi that we need to move forward as a country. We need to make sure that we have schools that work in rural areas. Housing, which is a huge problem. Thank you, child. That is very, very good. Excellent. And so this is this heartland economics that leaves no one behind. That means taking on income disparity, right? It means taking on income disparity in a way where you're not just talking the talk, but you're doing the deed. I think that's something to do with the FFA creed, right? It's not just talking the talk, it's the deeds as well. So that means changing and reversing some of the big provisions in that Republican tax plan, right? People are finally figuring this out. They got these big refunds last time and now, oops, maybe that was a little bit of a sleight of hand in how they did that, which is one of the reasons I didn't vote for. Or the fact that corporate tax rate, instead of just going down to, say, like 25%, went down all the way to 21%. Every single point, do you know what it was, Iowa? Every single point was $100 billion, okay? Think about what that could buy with infrastructure and roads and bridges and repairs and rail and locks and dams on our rivers. Think of what that could buy. Or it could go to help with our debt, but no, that's what they did. They went all the way down to 21%. That contributed to even more disparity in this country. You look at what it would be like if we could finally, I first got to the Senate, we increased the minimum wage fairly. Think of what it would mean if we increased the minimum wage nationally to $15 an hour. That's what we need to do across the country. You look at our health care, and I am so proud that we passed the Affordable Care Act and that we stood up against those forces that were trying to repeal it. I remember being in a parade on 4th of July in a little town in Minnesota. By the way, I visit all 87 counties every single year, okay? That kind of gives you a sense of what's going on out there. There are some counties that I literally have visited almost every person in the county. There's a county near the Canadian border where we couldn't find a place for me to visit, and we finally found a business called Insect Inferno. We kill bed bugs with heat. And it was literally just a truck that drove around. And they put me in the truck. And they put it up to about 100 degrees. And that was when I really started to believe that elected leaders should not just go where it's comfortable, but should go where it's uncomfortable. All right. So when I was in one of those small parades, this mom comes up to me and she's got a stroller and her child's in there. Her child has Down syndrome. She came up to me right in the middle of all those efforts to try to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and she pointed at him and she says, "This is what a pre-existing condition looks like." Yeah. And she said, "I will do anything for my child, and I will stand in the middle of this parade route, but we will not repeal the Affordable Care Act." That's what protects him every day. So that's our number one goal, is to do no harm. But of course, that bill is a beginning and not an end, and we have to expand to universal health care, right? Yeah. Make sure everyone gets it. And then the third thing we need to do is to take on the pharmaceuticals. Yeah. My guest at the State of the Union, sitting there looking down at Donald Trump, was a woman whose son was 26 years old, a restaurant manager in the southern suburbs in the Twin Cities, and he aged off his parents' health care. 26 is the age. So then his insulin prices has gone up, as you all know, to astronomical levels for everyone in this country. So he started rationing his insulin. He didn't get it quite right, and he died. This is a restaurant manager in Minnesota. This is in a country that should be able to afford simple drugs like insulin. And I can tell you, those pharmaceutical companies think they own Washington. Well, they don't own me. And that is why we need to pass my bill to finally push the pharma companies to lift the ban on negotiating prices for pharmaceutical drugs under Medicare, right? This is literally, there's a ban in place that says 43 million seniors can't negotiate the prices of their drugs. We've got to stop where you have pharma paying off generics to keep their products off the market, and we have to allow for less expensive drugs from countries like Canada, right? Those are just a few of the ideas. There's so much more, because the president claims he wants to take this on. Do you know what happened when he announced his proposal? Did your prices go down? No. Do you know what went up? Not just your prices. Do you know what went up? The stock for the pharmaceutical companies. That actually happened. So that is why we need to take this on. Another idea of a challenge that's before us that we actually can do and should have the will to take on, and that's the digital disruption. Jobs are changing around this country, and we have to make sure we're training our workers, right? We're protecting our workers. Thank you, Teamsters. You're welcome. But we are also planning and training our workers for the jobs that are ahead. Right now we have a disconnect between the jobs that are open and the training that we have and the workers that we have, and we have to match those up. And we have to reward and recognize the dignity of work, right? Yeah. We have to make sure that we do that in the wages, in the healthcare, and in everything else we do. And by the way, there are plenty of ways to pay for this, okay? And there are plenty of ways, like for instance, capital gains, right? Why are we taxing that at a lower rate than regular income? This makes no sense. Why don't we close this loophole that says that Warren Buffett pays lower taxes than his secretary? There are many things we can change. Unfortunately, they didn't do that in the Republican tax bill. Another challenge in front of us, climate change, right? And on the first day as your president, I will put us back into the International Climate Change Agreement. We will bring back the clean power rules and the gas mileage standards and take this issue on. Last year, 4th hottest year in the history of recorded temperatures, right? Think about that. Think about that video, if you haven't seen it, you should, of that dad talking his child down in the car as he drives her through fires that are lapping at their car. That is happening right now in this country. Another challenge that we have is making sure we do something about privacy legislation. And I got a bill to do that. We have done nothing. We basically let the big tech companies say, oh, trust us, we got you, we have your back. Well, we know that's not the case. Another one, consolidation. Do you know where the antitrust movement started? Do you know what was the first state that passed comprehensive antitrust legislation in the Union? Not Minnesota. Iowa! That is correct. It was Iowa that did it with the Granger movement, Minnesota, Iowa, North Dakota. This came out of the Midwest. And right now with this conservative court, and with what we're seeing with Congress doing nothing, we're seeing more and more consolidation. That is not good for competition, that is not good for prices, and it's not good for capitalism in America. Antitrust laws have always been a check and balance. It means if you don't do it, it means higher prices for our farmers. We're down now in rail to, I think, 4 major Class 1 railroads, right? That happens to be the same number as we have on the monopoly board. No coincidence. So taking this issue on, passing my bills that changes the standard to meet our times, as well as making it easier to enforce the laws, is going to be key as we look at how we take on the challenges in front of us. And just having simple sound bites, that's easy, okay? But taking on these challenges is going to be how we move our country forward, so no one gets left behind. Last challenge I'll lay out there for you is the challenge of the hatred that we're seeing in our country. And a lot of it is coming right out of the president's Twitter feed, right? You can check any week and you see a lot of it. We had a family in my state that had, from our Somali community, they'd never experienced discrimination, not after 9/11, not any time, the parents. They get married, they go out to dinner just a few years ago at the height of the bad rhetoric, and the 4 of them are sitting at a table and this guy walks by and he says, you 4 go home. You go home to where you came from. And the little girl looks up at her mom and she says, Mom, I don't want to go home. You said we could eat dinner out tonight. You think of the words of that innocent child. She only knows one home. And that's my state, that's your state. She only knows one home, and that's the United States of America. So our country has always been a beacon for new immigrants. I know all of you have stories in your family. Our country is a country that doesn't believe that immigrants diminish America, right? We know that immigrants are America. And that is why, not just because it's morally right, but it's economically right in states like ours, right, who needs the workers in our fields and in our factories and in our nursing homes and at our universities, that we pass comprehensive immigration reform. So Walt Whitman, famous great American poet, once wrote a poem called, We Hear America Singing the Very Carols We Hear. And in that poem, he talked about the shoemakers and the masons and the carpenters. And they're all still part of our singing. Well, maybe not shoemakers quite as much. But now we add to that our brothers and sisters, right? We add people of different races and creeds and religious faiths. And that is all part of the carols that we sing in this country. So I am running for this office because I believe we should be governing not from chaos, but from opportunity. But I also believe that we can cross this river of our divides. I do, because I see it every single day in this great country that we live in. And I certainly see it in the grassroots politics in states like Minnesota and Wisconsin and Iowa, right? We know how to run a caucus in our states, right? So I think you all know that I don't come from a lot of money, right? I do not come from a political machine. I do not come from some major campaign super PAC. I've never even had one before. But what I do have is grit. And I have my friends and my neighbors, and that includes my friends in the state next door. I have all of you who are willing to come out on a Saturday afternoon and hear me out. I grew up in the tradition of politics called the Wellstonian tradition, right? And Paul Wellstone would drive around in that green bus, and he taught me actually how to campaign on city buses. And for you young people who didn't meet him, he was this really cool guy, short, small, a wrestler, and he came out of nowhere, and no one thought he could beat a really wealthy guy, and he did it, and he won his seat. And he did it just all the right ways in reaching out to people. But he taught me how to campaign on city buses, and what we would do is we would shake everyone's hands, go down 10 blocks, and then we would go, see you later, and then we would buy a ticket going the other way. And we would just went back and forth and back and forth. But the other thing he taught me was this grit. And I will never forget that last year when we tragically lost him and Sheila and their daughter Marcia and their staff members on that plane crash. That's right. I'll never forget it, but I'll also never forget the joy of that year. Because that was the year that he had taken this incredibly hard vote. He was the only one in a tough race that voted against the war in Iraq, and that was the right thing to do. And he took that vote. But it was also the year that he announced to the world that he had MS. So while he used to run back and forth really fast in those parades, he couldn't do it anymore when he got sicker. And so he would stand on the back of the bus and he would just wave to people with Sheila at his side. But the coolest thing about it that summer is that you didn't even notice he wasn't running. Why? Because there were so many people in those green shirts running around him, right? They had created the energy to make it seem like he was running himself. And that's what I'm asking you to do in this election. I hope you'll support me, okay? I know that I can beat Donald Trump because I have won in the rural counties in our state. I have won every single congressional district, including Michelle Bachmann's 3 times in a row. Common ground and reach out beyond your own comfort level and not leave the Midwest behind at a gas station. I say that because my husband is the third of 6 boys. And sometimes they lived in a trailer court in Mankato, and they would go on one vacation a summer in their station wagon, and he was always a quiet boy in the middle, and they would get in the station wagon and they would have to count off 1 through 6 to make sure he didn't get left behind at the gas station. So this campaign is going to leave no one behind, and I hope you will sign up to help us. I hope you will believe in this simple idea that there is a way to find common ground and move forward together and look at each other and look up and move forward as a country. Let's get this done. Sign up, and I'm off to the auxiliary room. Thank you, everybody.